I will now call to order the Monday, February 13th, 2012 informational meeting of the Sioux Falls City Council. Welcome to all of those of you here at Carnegie Town Hall and those watching us on CityLink or at siouxfalls.org. We'll begin today with a staff report from Interim City Clerk Sue Roust.
Okay, I'll make it quick, but I have a few things to tell you about. One, you had been interested in having an ability for citizens to leave comments, and you may notice that we have a comments box now over on the table over here. I think it's in there. And so anybody is free to leave comments, either addressed to an individual council member or the whole council or another department, and we will forward those on to the appropriate people the following morning. I want to remind you that Breakfast Club meets this Wednesday at 7:30 a.m. at the Pavilion. The program this month will be Lynn Keller-Forbes from CCOG talking about what CCOG can do to help local governments. We still need to fill in the Board of Equalization schedule that comes up in mid-March. Our goal is to have at least five times when 5 council members, including the mayor, can be present. And so far we've got 2 that have 5 people, and we have quite a scattering. What I'd like to do is just pass this sheet around again today, and if you're scheduled for a time when there are just 1 or 2 people, would you look and see if you can switch to a time when we could get up to 5 at the same time. And if that doesn't work, I'll talk to each of you individually. The last comment is I will be in Pier again Thursday. Senate Bill 58 on the voting centers will be heard in House Local Government. And we need to get that passed really fast because we're coming up to deadline for making decisions for the April 10th election. So I'll be out there for the day.
Any questions for Mrs. Roust? If not, thank you. City Council open discussion. Councilor Karski.
I guess I'd like to visit a little bit about what Ms. Rouse just talked about in our voting centers, and we talked at last week's City Council meeting about how we're going to inform the public of where they can vote. We've had 3 elections, I believe, in the last year or 15 months, and each time most people have had to vote at different locations, and I'm beginning to think that we're going to start losing voters if we don't do a good job of informing them. And I know we stand to save a lot of money by going to the voting center thing, and I think we need to do a little bit more, figure out a better way to publicize where people can vote, a map with locations. I know we're going to do something in the water bill. I don't think that, while I like that one thing, I don't think that is enough publicity for people. So I think we need to come up with ideas to make that a little bit better, and maybe even spend a little bit of money that we're saving to facilitate a better voter turnout.
Comments? Councilor Erpenbach.
I would agree. Councilor Karski and I talked about this a little bit last week, and yeah, absolutely, there's going to be some savings, and it's a great service to the community to be able. I always use the example that I always have to take my mom to vote, and we vote in 2 different precincts, but when we have voting centers, I can take her to one place and vote, both of us vote in the same place. It's really convenient. But Councilor Karski is right that the more times we kind of change this back and forth, the more confusing it gets for people, and I think we do need to do some real serious messaging on that topic when the time comes.
Anyone else like to comment? If not, thank you, Karski. Councilor Karski. Councilor Jamison.
Just another topic, if I could.
You bet.
A follow-up. Last Thursday, we had a audit committee meeting with Rich Oaksall. We covered the cash-wide city disbursements fund. I think that's how we referred to it, and the agenda items for the 2012 audit plan. Rich is going to update the rest of the council, I believe, in an informational March 5th, and he'll update us on the progress of those items. But more importantly, for the council, if Joe Marsh, one of our members, is leaving the committee, and we need a new member, somebody with accounting background, a CPA, somebody with audit experience, somebody outside the council, we need another member. So if anybody has any ideas or recommendations, please send them on to me or Rich. That'd be great.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Rolfing.
Yes, just want to remind everybody that we have an urban ag task force meeting this Friday, the 17th at 3 o'clock at the main public library. So please come join us.
Thank you. Other council open discussion? Counselor Erpenbach.
I would just add that, again, jumping around topics here, but South Dakota Municipal League Board met last week, and Sioux Falls is required to have a member on that board. Councilor Brown was that member for a long time, and then was term limited out, and now I am that person, so I was at that meeting. Not a long meeting, not a dramatic meeting. We did look at our financial statements for the league. As the largest member of the league, we have a pretty big stake in that. Financially, the league is doing very well. And then the rest of the time we spent on legislative updates, and then some of us, Councilor Karski, Councilor Rolfing, Councilor Brown, and myself were all there for the rib dinner that night with the legislators, which is always good networking time. And we spent all day Wednesday as Municipal League Day and the legislature, so that was a good time was had by all. I'm sure we did we did have some impact on some legislation. We didn't say anything, but we kind of worked so it was a fun time that day. But then Thursday was Sioux Falls Day at the legislature, and the four of us were there for that too. So it's a rocking time in Pierre last week.
Thank you for representing us.
You bet.
Any other council open discussion? If not, we'll go on to today's presentations, and first of all, we'll begin with 911 legislation update.
Good afternoon, Council. I'm Darren Ketchum, Director of Metro Communications. As most of you are aware, Senate Bill 174 has been working its way through the legislative process this year, and it's an act to revise 911 statutes and the surcharge that is collected on your telephone bills that funds 911 centers. The bill made it through the full Senate last week, 29 yes, 6 excused, so we're on pretty good grounds there. I think it'll be assigned to a House committee at some point this week, we're hoping, and we'll go back out there and, kind of get that same gang involved and hope for good things. And we've had lots of discussions. It's been a very coordinated process from lots of stakeholders across the state. And I thank you for your support. I know that you've reached out to local legislators, and I'll be in touch with you again as the House nears closer to their vote. And certainly I'm able to answer any questions that you may have at this time.
Any questions for Director Ketchum? Councilor Erpenbach.
Thanks, Darren. That was one of the things that we were kind of involved with when we were in Pierre last week. And the thing that we kept hearing in all the testimony was how, as you said, coordinated it was, all the collaboration that was going on. Can you talk a little bit about your role in that, how that all came together?
Absolutely. This process began, well, some of the first meetings I went to were in December. It actually began before that with Senator Brown from Gettysburg is the prime sponsor on the bill. And he started working with a small group of people, and then we engaged in this topic in December, and really that's when the drafting of the legislation began. And we've had representatives from the telephone industry, both wireless, traditional wireline, retailers, 911 centers, law enforcement, other legislators, the Municipal League, Association of County Commissioners, many of those different people. And typically what you've seen in years past is the bill has not got all those people on the same page. We've had different telephone providers that have worked against us. And this year, at the Senate committee testimony, there was about 15 to 20 people that spoke in favor, and actually 3 of the telephone companies sent representatives up to the podium to speak in favor of the bill. So when you get the telephone companies on board, it really makes things a lot easier. And I guess also when you have 0 opposition in the committee hearing, it makes it even a touch easier.
We appreciate your work on it too. We know that you had a key role in some of those meetings, and so we appreciate the amount of time you've spent on it and the way that you've kept us in the loop information-wise. Thank you, Darren.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, thank you, Darren.
Thank you.
Item B, the public consumption ordinance revision is going to be rescheduled upon the request of Chief Barthel. We'll now go on to the Event Center project update, and we'll hear from Director Mark Cotter.
Good afternoon, council members. Mark Cotter with the Office of Public Works. Today there will be 6 of us speaking to you to give you an update on the event center, to progress you through all the different steps and stages of where we're at today. Next slide. All right. First of all, for the update on the design and construction aspects of the event center, we're currently in a stage called design development. Design development is essentially establishing the basic layout and approach for all the plans, the building imagery, what it will look like on the inside and the outside, what the event center seating diagrams will look like for the different types of events, whether it's basketball, hockey, or another multi-purpose event, and then also engaging the local building and fire code officials so the designers know up front what the interpretation of those various codes will be as we go forward. Where we're at in that process, we're 35% complete with the design development. We're making decisions on the floor plans and the general and premium seating. I do want to recognize that we've had significant input from 2 national firms, SMG and Global Spectrum. They've engaged both their local experts and their national experts in that process, so we can use some of what they consider as key checklists when you're building a new modern facility. And then we've also started to get input from the 2 citizen committees that we have. And so as we begin this process, we feel like we have a very good decision matrix set up to deliver a really good and functional facility. We also are starting to review some of the alternate materials and color palette concepts that will go into this facility. Those essentially need to be made in parallel as we stay on track with design development. And Mortensen works simultaneously with the designers to make sure that we're within cost expectations of those alternatives. We've conducted the first citizen committee meetings, and I've got 2 slides to share with you on that. The schedule for design development, that's the key stage that we're in today, is that we expect to be at 50%. We're on track with that right now on March 1st. And by May 1st, we expect to be 100% complete with what we call design development. There's a stage after that that starts to even further refine the design plans, but this really starts to lock in the geometrics, the functional layout, how large the rooms are, and what some of the initial concepts will be on materials used. Next slide. All right, now there's 2 slides on the 2 citizen committees that we're using, and this committee really focuses on what the end user will see and experience in the facility. Has a keen focus on the materials, the colors, the furniture, the signage, and the art that would be expected to be in the facility. One of the challenges that this committee has is that it's not a building with a singular purpose. It's not an elementary school building where you could just focus on one event that's going to happen in that facility year-round. It's got to be reach many different audiences that will either attend a sporting event, a concert, or a convention, or any other multi-purpose type event. So we've put that challenge on this committee to make sure that they really look at that from multiple different backgrounds will use this facility. Do want to just publicly recognize those committee members that are that have been selected from over 60 applicants. First, Sue Aguilar, City Council, Southeast District. Thank you. Elizabeth Obaka, she's an architect with TSP. Heidi Coatsworth, Ethan Allen Design Center. Chase Kramer works with Van de Waal and Associates, another architecture firm in town. Andy Wentz with Sanford Health. Chad Meyer with Admire Design. Lee Otis with CenturyLink. Corey Camp with Augustana College. Anthony Randall with KSIH Agriculture. Nan Baker with Sioux Falls Arts Council. Ivy Olin with Oland Arts Consulting. And AJ Couture with Designing Dreams by AJ. So they've had their first meeting. And we've provided a schedule, and we'll continue to carry out those meetings. Next slide. The second committee has a different focus. This focus is really to optimize the operations and the flexible nature of the facility because, again, it's not a single-use facility. It has to be flexible, has to be functional, and has to meet the needs of expected sports tenants, concert promoters, hosts for conventions, and so they're all looking at that in concert together. And so with an operational and functional design focus, I also would like to recognize these committee members: Kenny Anderson Jr., Northeast District Council. Thank you, Kenny. Brody Busho with the Sioux Falls Stampede. Anita Keeley with the Design Studio. John Lose with the Washington Pavilion. Mark Miley, Sioux Falls School District. Jonathan Oppold, Core Trust Bank. Craig Pomeranke, Global Spectrum. Justin Sell with South Dakota State University. Mike Sullivan, Sports Authority. Terry Torkelson with SMG. Eric Van Beek with the Sioux Falls Storm. Del Waltner, owner of Sport Games and Sport Court. And Bob Winkles with Sanford Health. Again, just like to publicly recognize and thank them in advance for their time, as they will be heavily involved in the design of this facility from now until August. Next slide. Last is some key meetings that will start to happen this week. We've started this project with a local participation goal to build this with local contractors of 85%. That essentially builds on our goal that we've used from the very beginning, was to use taxpayer dollars wisely, hire qualified subcontractors, use a very competitive process in the selection of contractors, and we'll start to lay out those key deliveries this week on February 15th. The meeting is at the Convention Center from 4 to 6 p.m. Mortensen Construction will host the event and really provide their company background, previous projects, the expected schedule for this Sioux Falls Event Center, and the different types of solicitations of how we'll actually hire subcontractors, which can be through competitive bid or competitive proposal. Competitive proposal is essentially what best value is, and before we go down that road on best value, we'll get a statement from Mortensen that justifies which segments of the facility they would recommend that we use best value. This essentially allows us to weight price, qualifications, relevant experience, local market knowledge, and the outcome of interviews. That's my update for this month. I'll transfer it over to Tracy Turbeck. Tracy?
Thank you, Mark. Tracy Turbeck, the City Finance Office. Just one slide on my piece of the presentation today, so I won't be talking to you too long. I do want to touch on two topics relative to the bond sale and the financing. Last month at our update, I mentioned that we had received the bond rating from Moody's, but we had not yet at that point received the final rating report from Standard & Poor's, and we have now received both. Both Moody's and Standard & Poor's has assigned put our bonds in a high investment grade category. Moody's assigned a AA2, and the Standard & Poor's was a AA minus. So those are both very, very good bond ratings and should translate into a very competitive bond sale and very, very attractive interest rates as we move forward with that bond sale. In terms of the actual bond sale, we are in the process now that we've pretty nearly closed out the 2011 fiscal year. We're up in the process now of updating our preliminary official statement with our most recent sales tax collection data, as well as other financial data that will be updated through the end of the calendar year. So I think that will certainly provide more current information to potential investors as well when we do move forward with the bond sale. I've mentioned in previous updates the issue of the taxable versus tax exempt portion of the project and evaluating that structure and the private business use of the facility. That analysis continues, and as Mark mentioned, we're moving deeper into the design process. The more that I can be told of the potential use of the facility in terms of the square footage, for example, how much square footage is allocated for concession stands and food and beverage services, how much of the square footage is allocated for private, what will ultimately be private suites. That can be factored in then to our analysis of how much of the facility can or must be financed using taxable bonds versus tax-exempt bonds. So the deeper into the design process we go, the more certain we can be in terms of structuring our bonds, as well as allowing more flexibility in the future for potential naming rights contracts, and Darren will speak a little bit more to naming rights in just a minute. One of the strategies that we're evaluating is to split the bond into two sales rather than one. Again, that would be based on a cost-benefit analysis that we're in the middle of to determine does it make sense to issue most of the bonds in the very near future, but reserve some when we know more about what the potential naming rights contract will be. And so that's an analysis we're currently going through with PFM as our financial advisor, and I expect that's a decision that we'll make very, very soon. In fact, a bond sale date, again, has not been established as yet, but I do expect that to happen fairly soon, and I would expect that a large portion of the bonds, perhaps all of the bonds, would be sold very late February, perhaps very early March. So that's kind of the timeline we're working on now. If we do split it into two, we would issue the bulk of those bonds, as I say, in late February, early March, and then we would reserve the rest to be sold when we have a firmer idea of what the naming rights contracts will look like. So with that, I will turn it over to Darren, and he'll expand a little bit more on the discussion of naming rights.
Good afternoon, Darren Smith, Director of Community Development. I do have the most brief slide, probably the least colorful, but no less important. We do have an exciting announcement to make. This first bullet point, later this month we do plan to initiate the process of pursuing title sponsor naming rights. We don't have the exact process finalized, all the details nailed down just yet, which is why we're looking at doing that in the next few weeks. But we have been doing a lot of research as to how other cities and counties have done this, and we feel we are at a point where we can and should move forward with this, and there is strong demand. There will be strong demand. The second item deals with the fact that later this week we plan to issue an RFP, or a request for proposal, for sales and marketing services for naming rights, premium sponsorships, premium seating, and other sponsorships. In other words, finding out exactly what's out there in the form of professional services to potentially assist us with selling the building at the appropriate time. It is, at this point, more of an information collection process for us. Again, we want to find out exactly who's out there. We've been through a similar process before, so we think we have a good idea. But we want to find out exactly who's out there, who these firms are. More importantly, start drilling down a little further on what the pricing structure would look like in our market for our specific facility, the commission, the fees, and so forth. And we also feel that the timing is perfect with doing a number of these things, these two things, as well as the RFP for the facility manager, doing these things in parallel or simultaneously. That makes a lot of sense, and that's something that we'll be able to elaborate on further as we go through, and we'll look forward to questions at the end. So at this time, I'll introduce Mike Cooper.
Good afternoon, Mike Cooper, Planning and Building Services. I'm going to address two of the tasks that we're currently working on. Last time we talked to the council about the process in terms of developing an RFP to select a management firm that would be in charge of the entire complex, not only the new event center, but also the current arena, existing arena and convention center. And we've selected the consulting firm Crossroads Consulting Services to help us work through that process. We have been meeting with them on a regular basis and talking to them on a regular basis. Some of the things that we're looking at right now is to determine what should be the operating objectives in terms of a management structure and how those objectives would relate to potential ranking criteria as part of a request for proposal process. It would be things that you would normally expect to include, like a cost-effective operation, innovative marketing, competitive booking process, excellent customer service, and then how they would collaborate with other organizations such as the CVB, the Sports Authority, the sports teams. So those are some of the things that we're working through now, again, to determine how those would be placed in an RFP and determined in terms of ranking criteria. We've talked with our consultant and internally that with our track record of both Global Spectrum and SMG, because we have a long history with both of those companies, they're both nationally recognized, that it's probably in our best interest to limit the selection to one of those two firms. It would be very unusual for us to probably want to go outside and select a firm that we've never worked with at all, that we have no history with. So what we're talking about potentially is a closed RFP process in terms of the management agreement that would be limited to both Global Spectrum and SMG. However, our consultant has suggested that we might want to expand the RFP to include alternatives for food and beverage proposals. Right now, Global Spectrum has a subsidiary called Ovations, and SMG has Savor. Both of those are their food and beverage components. But there might be some advantages to the city by opening up that component for additional proposals. So we're currently considering that as an option. The target dates for the request for proposals right now would be to issue in early March, receive those proposals approximately 30 days by the end of March. By mid-April, we would do the reviews and interviews, and then hopefully we would have contract negotiations and completion of that contract by the end of May. Right now, that's our target dates for going through that process. The second area to update you today is on a master planning process that's going on as a joint effort between community development and planning. And this is to look at an area master plan for the event center facility. We started out by having a series of interviews and meetings with hotel managers, commercial developers, as well as property owners in the area. And what we're trying to do is get a sense of what the market demand is, as well as potential for commercial development in this particular area. And the people that we've interviewed and talked to so far is a pretty comprehensive list. Lloyd Companies, Hague Companies, Dunham Companies. Those are all three commercial brokers that have experience in various types of retail and other commercial development. Ramkota Companies obviously has an existing facility that we're asking them to tell us again what potential they see for the hotel market, as well as Ramada Inn and Suites and Sheraton of Sioux Falls. So we're talking to not only commercial brokers, but also existing hotel people in the immediate area. Jan's company has land out along Westport Avenue, and they also have experience with different types of commercial development. NAI Commercial Real Estate, Dennis Bresky, again, is a commercial broker that would have ideas on what type of development is going to be in demand for this particular area of the city, as well as Bender Commercial, Michael Bender. Minnehaha County we've talked to briefly because they do own property on the north side of Russell Street, which is the existing work release facility, asking what future potential plans might be there for that particular area. Lee Howell is a local hotel owner. Bob Hall is a primary property owner up along Westport Avenue. And then Sanford Health obviously has the Sanford Sports Complex. So that's where we've been so far in terms of a series of meetings. I think it's kind of interesting to show you the area that we're looking at in terms of a master planning. And finally, we get to look at a map. That gets me excited about looking at maps. And we decided to develop a box of master planning, which would include on the north end 60th Street. On the east side would go along the airport down Minnesota Avenue. On the south side would be just south of Madison Street. And then on the west side would be along the west side of Interstate 29. And it's kind of interesting because you look at kind of a triangle of influence. You've got the airport on one corner, the event center complex on one corner, and then the Sanford Sports Complex on the third corner. So if you kind of connect those three dots in this triangle of influence, we believe there's going to be really strong potential for some significant development in this area. Not only because of the event center, but also because of the airport and also because of Sanford Sports Complex. So the synergy of working with three major destinations in one area, I think is going to give us some good, strong recommendations for the future. As we've gone through this process, you probably are aware that we've had one initial meeting with the West Sioux neighborhood, and the turnout was much greater than we had anticipated. We sent out over 200 notices. Councilmember Karski was there, and again, can reflect on the interest, the diversity of the people that did show up that were asking about future plans for the area as well as for their neighborhood. We heard that we need to look at things like parking, traffic. We need to look at some drainage issues in the neighborhood and other event impacts. We heard about things like fireworks, before and after events. So there's a number of things that we've been asked to take a look at in terms of not only the event center, not only development in the area, but also just neighborhood issues. And so we will continue to look at that, and we will continue to go back and work with that neighborhood. We also expect to have future meetings with neighborhood businesses, existing businesses, again, to ask them what their interests might be for the area that we've identified in the map, maybe what their potential expansion plans might be or other ideas that they have. So there's a number of steps that we're going to continue to work through between now and May. We're going to continue to gather existing information about the property in this square box. We're going to identify different development options based on what we believe the market is going to support, whether it's going to be commercial, office, residential, whatever it might be. And then look at different implementation strategies, whether it's going to be on the public side or the private side, and how we can encourage or support whatever type of development we believe is going to be feasible in this area. And so as we work through this process, we'll be asking for additional public input, both from a neighborhood as well as from a community level, and then ultimately we will be bringing the City Council a recommendation for this master plan. Next in line, Karen Leonard is going to update you in terms of the different legal services that we're working through right now.
Karen Leonard, Assistant City Attorney. I'm going to update you on 5 areas our office is working on to provide legal support on the Event Center project. The first being is insurance. We are right now exploring excess coverage for professional liability insurance provided by St. Combs. Also, builder's risk insurance is being vetted out in the event that we may need additional builder's risk insurance in addition to what Mortensen Construction will be providing. We're also taking a look at pollution insurance and lost income insurance in the event that there is a natural disaster or something that comes to town that would not allow us to open timely, and there would be lost income or lost revenues from those events that are lost. So we're exploring all of those options right now and should be providing you further update as we research those further. The second thing we're working on is the operator management contract. I'm working with Crossroads to draft a sample contract that will be attached to the RFP when it is issued in early March. The third area is I'm working with outside counsel right now on the architect and engineer and construction manager at risk contracts. We're already doing a few amendments to those. One amendment that we're working on is to increase St. Combs' insurance requirements. When they turned over their policy, we discovered that they're carrying higher policy limits than what we negotiated, so we want to implement that during the life of their contract. We're also going to be including updated exhibits as personnel changes at Mortensen and at St. Combs. We'll be updating those exhibits to the contract to include those personnel. And we should be receiving later this week a copy of an updated program, and so that amendment will be forthcoming. The fourth area that we're working on currently is Mortensen Construction. Right now has a limited notice to proceed while we await the bond issuance, and so that will expire at the end of this month, and so we're drafting another limited notice to proceed through the end of April of 2012. And it's also, it looks likely as of today that the St. Combs contract will also need a second limited notice to proceed, and so we will be updating that as well. And I think Mark Cotter mentioned that there's a couple delivery methods that we're exploring right now for the construction manager at risk. And so I've been working with outside counsel, Jim Wiederick from Woods Fuller, to advise us on best value contracts and the low bid contracts, and making sure that when they do, if they use the best value method of delivery, that it will come into compliance with state law. That's the end of my report, and at this time, I will turn it over to Mayor Huther to give some closing remarks.
Councilor Ayala, thank you for the opportunity. The amount of time and effort, the amount of hours that is being spent on this project is enormous. Trying to put this all into a 30 to 40 minute presentation for the council is difficult, but we certainly respect the time of the council as well as the other needs of the city. However, we do want to make sure that the public is fully aware that we are trying to be open, we are trying to be transparent, and we definitely want to be available to them and their questions. We learned that in a big way with that West Sioux neighborhood meeting. We had certain expectations going into it, and when we showed up that night, we had probably 200 people that were thoroughly engaged, thoroughly interested, and yes, in some ways concerned about how the new event center would impact them. And so we definitely want to be able to address those concerns as well as capture all of those opportunities. As Mark had mentioned, there's some important meetings coming up. One that, again, we wanted to reiterate is the subcontractor open house. We have sent out hundreds of invitations, and it looks like that's going to be another major meeting where we're going to have incredible attendance. There are people who want jobs in our town. There are people who want to bid on this, and they want to capture the work associated with this new $150 million event center, and we're looking forward to talking to them on February 15th and beyond. We'll be back here next March 12th at 4 p.m. to give you another update. We're going to try to coordinate with the council in a better fashion so that maybe we'll even have more time to answer your questions and give you an even more detailed report on all the work that is happening. And then, again, I wanted to just reiterate, we do want to provide an opportunity for the public to engage us on this topic. About March 15th is when we would like to have an open house for the entire city of Sioux Falls. And at about that time, as Mark had mentioned, we're going to have about 50% of the design work done. And I think that gives us a good opportunity to kind of show what's going on, what this grand venue is going to look like, the functionality that we'll be able to capture, and more. Again, we're working hard to keep you informed, as well as we certainly want to be available to the council to answer your questions as well. So with that, Councilor Chair Aguilar, we are certainly open for any questions that you may have.
Questions? Councilor Karski.
Yes, I'd like to have many questions, but this one's probably directed for Director Turbach, if I may. Tracy, we had budgeted $4.2 million this year for bond repayment. Obviously, we probably won't be starting to make bond payments to May, June. So what are we anticipating spending in bond repayments for this year based on that $4.2 million that we had set aside?
You're correct. We did in the budget for this year allocate $4.2 million in sales tax, second penny sales tax revenues for eventual bond payments. what will happen, because for every month that goes by for which we don't have bonds outstanding, there's certainly not interest accruing on those. My expectation is that we will still try to structure the bond so that come November, and we will make a payment this year in November, so we will use that $4.2 million, but we'll structure it so that whatever portion of that $4.2 million is not needed for interest payments will go to principal. So my intention would be to maximize the use of that $4.2 million for payments. And as I say, whatever we don't use for whatever isn't necessary to pay the interest will go toward principal.
Councilor Brown.
I think you probably want to stay there, Tracy. Just a question regarding the potential for the split sale on the bonds. Help me understand, because the naming rights, as I understood it, were going for operations. So what does that have to do with the construction in the bond funding?
Okay. It gets fairly complicated, but I'll take a stab at trying to explain that. But of course, the ideal situation would be to finance the entire project with tax-exempt financing because we can get better interest rates. The IRS won't let us use tax-exempt financing to build a facility that's going to be used for private business purposes, or at least to a certain extent. They will allow a certain limited amount of private business use of a facility that is financed with tax-exempt debt. We know that we will have some private business use in this facility. We will have food and beverage services in there, as Mike talked, third-party for-profit business that will be operating the food and beverage service, earning a profit in there. That's considered a private business use of the facility. So one of the things that we're looking at is funding whatever costs are associated in the construction process of building those food service concession stands and a certain amount of the kitchen facility, whatever, with taxable debt versus tax exempt, so that we don't use up any of that very limited amount of private business use that we can have with a tax-exempt financed facility. And we'll do the same thing, I expect, with the suites, because the Internal Revenue Service will look at those private suites as a use by that. Presumably businesses, for the most part, will be the ones leasing those suites. So the costs associated with constructing the suites, it will be advantageous for us to finance those costs with taxable debt. And one of the reasons we will carve those things out, so to speak, and finance those with taxable bonds versus tax exempt is that the naming rights, revenues that come in from naming rights, even though we may not, we have chosen not to use those to make bond payments, the IRS still looks at that as revenues coming in from a private business use of the facility. And there's no way to carve out any particular construction costs associated with naming rights. It's going to be the name on the top of the building, so we can't say, well, this certain amount of square footage is allocated to naming rights. So there's no way to carve that out or find a way to treat that revenue from naming rights separately. So we've got to count all that toward that very limited amount of private revenues that we can take in, or private business, or revenues from private business use. So in order to reserve the maximum amount of capacity, so to speak, of revenues that will come in from naming rights, we'll carve out those other uses. And the more of those other private business, the costs associated with private business use that we finance with taxable debt, the more we can potentially generate from naming rights revenues without running afoul of the IRS rules for tax-exempt financing. Now, if I haven't completely lost you, I'd be happy sometime to sit down and go into more detail with it. It's a little easier to draw it out maybe on paper and explain it. But
good explanation. Thank you.
Okay.
Councilor Rolfing.
Yes, Darren. Please. I'll turn my mic on now. I'm not concerned, but I'm interested in why we limited the number of RFPs on the operations to 2. And these 2 are, then we open it up to the food preparation, food and beverage. And maybe it's Mike. Is Mike on that? I'm sorry, Mike? I'm sorry. And then these 2 have very strong connections with the people that they work with for food and beverage, but we're looking at opening up that area of it. It seems to me like that could cause a problem, at least not in the short run, or in the long run, at least in the short run, of having them match up for a short time, trying to learn how to work with each other, and there could be some real problems that way. Can you address that?
Yes, I think that's a really good point, Counselor, because obviously we're dealing with that now.
Right.
With multiple parties managing multiple facilities.
Right.
Side by side.
And that's what we're trying to get away from.
Part of the strategy in terms of Crossroads Consulting was that at least take a look at what the competition is out there, and that might help even get a stronger proposal from one of the two current management companies. So,
Well, in that situation, then why don't we do it with everybody,
and we will be
with the whole thing?
We will be asking both SMG and Global as part of their RFP for the operating to include the food and beverage component.
No, my point then was, if that's their thought about the food and beverage, why aren't we doing it with the whole management system?
Because
And
the-
I understand
Yep.
their thinking that they're already here, and they've already got,
Yes.
the people in place, and it won't cost, there's probably no way it's going to happen, but the possibility could be that that could happen.
Yes.
And as much as I like these guys that are here, and they're doing a fantastic job for us, why not open it up and see if somebody could?
The food and beverage seems to be more of a specialized service around the country. And again, we may not get any proposals, we don't know, but that's what we've been basing the Crossroads Consulting people, that it just might be worthwhile to see what other competition is out there. It doesn't mean that you would be selecting anybody, but I think part of the selection process would be, how is a third party going to interact with one of the two existing companies? I think that will have a lot to say in terms of how we go through that selection process.
But my question still was, why don't we open it up to the third SMG or Global
Because
Spectrum?
we're not aware of who that third party would be that can bring in the entire package.
And we don't know who the third one might be on the food either, but if we're looking at competition,
Right.
why don't we do that?
We'll go back and review that again, but I understand your question.
And maybe there's no reason for it, but
Councilor Elfing, thanks for your questions. Again, the premise of the presentation today was to give you some of the things that we're brainstorming on.
Right.
Mr. Cooper didn't say that we're going to do this, but he did want to at least give you some of the rhyme and reason, some of the thought process that's going on behind the scenes. Okay. So that as we do execute some of these things 30 or 60 days from now, you're not completely caught off guard. When you look at the SMG or Global Spectrum, these are the two big boys, or the two big girls that are involved in this market. They are the best of the best, and it just so happens they're both working for the City of Sioux Falls. And we know them. We know the goods, we know the bads, and maybe we even know some of the uglies. But we know them incredibly well. And it is Crossroads' belief, as well as our belief, that when these two big boys start fighting head-to-head, that Sioux Falls is going to reap the rewards from that. And part of the things that you also do in business is, boy, if you can even get them to sharpen their pencil even more or become even more aggressive with their bid, you do that. And that's why Mr. Cooper, as well as Crossroads, had recommended maybe even potentially looking at some of the other businesses in this area that do provide that type of food and beverage service, just to see what kind of pencil sharpening we could get. We're not done with the process, but we wanted to give you just an idea of some of the things that we are considering, all in the spirit of trying to maximize the taxpayer dollar, get the best deal for the City of Sioux Falls, and ultimately to maximize the revenues and the profit of our new event center.
okay, got it.
Counselor Anderson Jr.
Karen Leonard, please. Thank you, Karen. On these amendments on these contracts, are these contracts that are already approved by the city council through the consent agenda?
When you adopted the construction manager at risk contract and the St. Combs contract back in October, the resolution authorized, those amendments to those contracts to be done administratively.
How will these amendments affect the contract cost? Will it affect the cost to us at all, or is this going to be on their end as far as increasing the insurance requirements?
Right. The overall goal is not to increase contract costs under their delivery methods, under the contract. We're going back and exploring the costs and who's going to share in what deductibles and whatnot, and we're doing the risk assessment right now.
When these amendments are approved through the administrative function, is the council going to be notified of those amendments?
Yes.
So that we're not caught off guard by them?
Absolutely.
I'm not against the administrative function, I just want to make sure that we're knowledgeable of it.
Absolutely, and we'll provide you a list of what goes through. Part of as this speeds up and ground breaks, there will be several things happening, as I understand it. It could be several decisions a week being made, and so that was why we chose to get the pre-authorization on the front end, but we'll be sending updates. I don't know if it's weekly or every other week, but we'll make sure you're updated.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Directors and Karen. Next item on the agenda is a potential executive session. I would now entertain a motion to go into executive session.
So moved, Erpenbach.
Could I have a second, please?
Second, Karski.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. We will now go into executive session.